There's a moment in almost everyone's financial life when the rules suddenly feel different. One day you're checking your balance and it seems like progress is crawling. Then, out of nowhere, it feels like your money picked up a second job behind your back. Not because you hustled harder, not because you got lucky, but because the math finally flipped in your favor. That shift doesn't happen randomly. It shows up at very specific points. And if you don't know where those points are, you might quit right before things start working. If you're someone who's been saving, investing, or trying to get your finances together, but it still feels like you're pushing a car uphill, this is the video that explains when the hill finally tilts downward. Before we get into the 3 thresholds, I want you to think about something. When you imagine someone who's financially secure, what do you picture? Maybe it's someone in a high-rise office trading stocks. Maybe it's someone who sold the startup. Maybe it's someone born into wealth. But here's what most people don't realize. Financial momentum usually has nothing to do with income level. It has everything to do with timing, consistency, and one invisible force most people underestimate for way too long. Compounding. Not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. The kind that looks boring right until it isn't. Most of us grow up thinking progress is linear. Put in effort, arrow get equal results. Save $1,000, arrow, you're $1,000 closer to your goal. Save $10,000, arrow, you're 10 times closer. Sounds logical, feels fair. Completely wrong. Real financial growth behaves more like a snowball rolling downhill. At first, it barely moves. Then it starts creeping. Then it starts rolling. Then suddenly, you're not pushing it anymore. You're chasing it. The tricky part? Most people give up while the snowball is still tiny. Not because they're lazy, because it looks like nothing is happening. That's why understanding the key tipping points matters. Because once you know where acceleration actually begins, patience suddenly feels easier. The first major shift usually happens when your invested assets hit roughly $75,000 to $125,000. The exact number varies depending on returns and contributions, but psychologically and mathematically, this is where things start to feel different. Why? Because before this point, almost all progress comes from you. Your deposits, your discipline, your sacrifices. Your money isn't doing much heavy lifting yet. It's more like a trainee than a teammate. Let's say someone invests a few $100s every month. For years, the account grows mostly because of what they put in, not because of investment gains. That phase can feel painfully slow. You might check your balance and think, seriously? That's it? But once you cross that first threshold, something subtle changes. The growth each year starts getting big enough to notice without squinting. Not life-changing yet, but noticeable. And that's important, because motivation doesn't come from numbers. It comes from momentum. This stage is where people finally realize, oh, this isn't pointless. This actually works. That realization alone is powerful enough to keep someone going for another decade. And that's good, because the next stage is where things really start to get interesting. The second tipping point tends to show up somewhere around $500,000. Not because it's a fancy round number, because that's when time starts contributing more than you do. Up until now, you've been the main engine. But at this level, your investment growth each year can rival or exceed what you personally add. Think about how wild that is. You're no longer the primary source of progress. Your past decisions are. That's the moment when wealth building stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like leverage. People often describe this phase as the first time money feels alive. Your account might fluctuate by thousands in a day, sometimes up, sometimes down, but the overall trend starts pointing upward in a way that's hard to ignore. Emotionally, something shifts too. Fear starts shrinking. Because when your assets can generate meaningful annual growth, setbacks stop feeling permanent. Lose a job? you still have momentum. Unexpected expense? You're buffered. Want to try something new? You actually can. Financial stress doesn't disappear at this stage, but it gets quieter, and that silence is addictive. Why most people never reach this stage. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The biggest obstacle isn't income, it's impatience. We live in a world trained for instant results, fast shipping, fast downloads, fast responses. Waiting years for visible progress feels unnatural. So when early investing looks slow, people assume something is wrong. They stop, not realizing they were inches away from the point where it starts speeding up. Stopping early is like planting a tree, watering it for years, then digging it up right before it starts bearing fruit. The math was about to reward them. They just didn't stay long enough to see it. The third transformation tends to happen once investments climb into the seven-figure range. And no, it's not just about bragging rights. It's about options. At this level, average long-term returns can translate into income-like growth each year. Not guaranteed, not perfectly steady, but significant. That's when people experience a mental shift that's hard to explain until you feel it. Work becomes a choice instead of a requirement. You can still work, of course, many people do, but the pressure changes. You're no longer asking, how do I survive? You're asking, what do I actually want to do? That's a completely different life question. And here's the wild part most people don't realize. Going from 1 million to 2 million is usually faster than going from 0 to 1 million. Not because the person suddenly becomes smarter, because the system is now doing most of the work. Growth builds on growth. Returns stack on returns. Time multiplies everything. The machine you spent years assembling finally turns on. Now let's address the worry that pops into everyone's head at this point. What about crashes? It sounds strange, but downturns can actually help long-term investors, especially earlier in the journey. When prices fall, your regular contributions buy more assets, more shares, more pieces of the future recovery. So when markets rebound, those extra pieces multiply the gains. In other words, lower prices today can mean faster growth tomorrow. People who understand this don't panic during downturns. They lean in, not recklessly, just consistently. Because they know volatility isn't the enemy. Quitting is. The real reason these milestones matter. Most financial advice focuses on tactics, which account to open, which fund to pick, which strategy to use. Those things matter, sure, but they're not what determines success. The real deciding factor is whether someone stays in the game long enough to reach escape velocity. These milestones aren't just numbers. They're psychological checkpoints. Each one changes how you think. First checkpoint, this works. Second checkpoint, this is working faster. Third checkpoint, this is working without me. That progression transforms behavior, and behavior determines outcomes, a perspective most people miss. Here's something worth thinking about. If someone starts investing today and stays consistent for decades, their biggest advantage won't be timing the market perfectly. It'll be time itself. Years will pass whether you invest or not. So the real question isn't, can I build wealth fast? It's, when the years pass anyway, will they pass with momentum or without it? Because the clock is moving no matter what. Why small decisions matter more than big ones. People often assume building wealth requires dramatic sacrifices, extreme budgets, massive risks, brilliant stock picks. Usually not true. More often it comes down to small, repeated choices. Saving a little automatically, increasing contributions gradually, not panicking during downturns, letting compounding run uninterrupted. None of those feel impressive in the moment, but stacked over years, they become unstoppable. Consistency is boring in the short term, and extraordinary in the long term. The finish line that isn't one. Reaching a major financial milestone feels incredible. Relief, pride, validation, all of it. But here's something fascinating. People who continue growing their wealth rarely treat big milestones as endings. They treat them as level ups. Because once you see how powerful compounding really is, stopping feels like unplugging a machine that was printing momentum. So instead of coasting, they keep the system running. Not out of greed, out of understanding. They know the hardest phase is already behind them. The bottom line. Financial acceleration doesn't happen randomly. It shows up in stages. First you grind, then it grows, then it glides. Most people only experience the first phase, assume that's all there is, and walk away. The ones who keep going long enough to reach the second and third stages discover something surprising. Wealth isn't built by intensity. It's built by endurance. So if progress feels slow right now, that doesn't mean you're failing. It might just mean you're still in the quiet phase, the part where nothing looks dramatic yet, but everything important is happening under the surface. Stick with it long enough, and one day you'll check your account and realize something strange. You're not pushing anymore. You're being pulled. And when that day comes, you'll be very glad you didn't quit early.